Hey guys. You are watching your anime world. How are you all? Please support to subscribe this channel for watching new interesting stories. So in this video, we will see what if Deku unlocked his legendary family powers. Here is short summary. Izuku Midoriya was a child without a quirk in his first 10 years. However, an event would awaken the powers he inherited from his paternal family, powers that were believed to be myths and legends many decades ago. But before we start, if you want more stuff like this, then be sure to subscribe and like this video. And if possible, share this video with your friends. Now let's start the story. Not everyone is born equal. That was the cruel reality I had to live with for the past 6 years. Only 80% of the human population in the world is born with superhuman abilities, self-proclaimed as quirks, which awaken when they turn 4. However, I was not blessed with this. I was always the odd one out among my generation, a quirk, and a loser in school. However, one event changed my life completely. This is my story of how I became the greatest hero of all time. I can't believe it, it's a fight between heroes and a villain. A 10-year-old boy thought excitedly. His hair was dark green, with fair skin and freckles on his cheeks, and his eyes were emerald green with slit-shaped pupils, a condition inherited from his father. He was wearing a high school uniform that consisted of a white shirt and a black school shirt over it, with pants of the same color and dark brown shoes. The shape of his hair was fluffy and shapeless, resembling that of a bush. A smile appeared on his face as he watched the confrontation between the heroes against the villain with a kind of quirk that made him increase the size of every part of his body. What could be the function of his body augmentation? The young man thought as he watched the battle with attention and concentration, while his hands held a notebook and a pencil. Thanks to years of experience, he could write and watch the fight without any mistakes. And if he enlarges his body, does that also mean that he increases his strength and the resistance of the limb itself? He thought again as he saw how the villain with the augmentation quirk grabbed the door of a car and threw it towards the heroes, who quickly dodged the door. However, the door embedded itself in the wall behind them. Is there a limit to how big you can get? And what does he need to do that? Quirks are superhuman abilities. Their main characteristic is that they are extensions of the body itself. No matter what type of quirk, there was always a physical consequence to using it for a long time. For example, the flames of the current number 2 hero Endeavor. If he increased their temperatures, then he would have a physical overheating to the point of reaching heat stroke, or so it had been his analysis and conclusion. And in this world where society is born with quirks, then the profession of hero was born. A dream come true for people of past generations, where being a hero was only some kind of dream and fantasy, which was now a common reality. I'm fed up, heroes, I'll finish you off. The villain roared as both his hands and arms grew in size, ready to crush the heroes or even kill them if he could. But before he could even take a step, a hero appeared so fast that the villain didn't react in time to avoid a kick that lodged in his face, quickly knocking him unconscious. This hero was called Flaming Kick, a hero known for his combat style based on a martial art that only uses kicks due to his quirk of the same name. His quirk consisted of his legs being in constant motion, creating so much friction that his legs entered a kind of spontaneous combustion that increased the man's speed as well as the strength and durability of his legs. The hero was also known for his charitable works to organizations that help people who have walking disabilities. His popularity reached such a point that he was in the top 10 several times, only being surpassed by Mirko, the rabbit heroine. Closing his notebook and putting it away in his yellow backpack, Izuku left the fight scene. Today he had to get to school early. It was a good thing that he always got to school earlier than usual. After all, being the outcast of his class and institute made him want to be alone at times. He wasn't popular. After it was discovered that he didn't have a quirk, his social life became, in simple words, total shit. After all, people without a quirk or with a villain quirk were the most harmed people in this society. A society that simply bothered Izuku, and many people took to drawing attention to themselves in the wrong way. That thought was shaken from his head after reaching deep into his thoughts. He had already passed that stage, the stage of contempt. He didn't want to experience it, not now. With a sigh, he arrived at his school and quickly entered his classroom, noticing that almost half of his class had not arrived, something that made him smile. He did not want to endure the mockery for the moment. As quickly as he could, he sat in his seat and took out his hero analysis notebook and wrote down the hypotheses he had about the quirk of the villain he had seen fight today. After learning that he did not have a quirk, he created a hobby in analyzing the quirks that he found interesting and versatile for future heroism. Currently he had 8 complete notebooks, full of information on multiple quirks of heroes or people he had met and villains. To many he seemed like a weirdo, but to him it was still a hobby that made him happy, and he did not care if others found him strange or useless. After several minutes, the entire classroom was filled with children, and their teacher entered with the professionalism of a teacher. Very well. Everyone sit down now and be quiet, there is an important announcement. The teacher ordered in a voice that gave no excuses or games, making all his students sit in their seats in silence and waiting for the information that their teacher was going to give them. As you may know, since last week, a new student joined us. However, she will not join until 2 days from now. I am letting you know so that you can prepare for your new partner. Izuku did not hear the announcement, however he saw one of his classmates raise his hand. What kind of quirk does he have? He asked, making everyone pay attention to the teachers. Students who came from other schools were always given information about their quirk, to be cautious of what their quirk could do. However, the quirk was not detailed that much, only some things that were important. We haven't been given the context of his quirk or how it works yet, but it's not a mutation or something that affects other people. The teacher said. The students nodded and school time began. Line break, after school. Izuku was angry, frustrated and irritated. Today again Bakugo, his childhood friend and his lackeys bothered him, again reminding him of his inability to be a hero being a quirklees. It wasn't his fault, but they always found some way to belittle him. Flashback. Izuku was packing his things. Today he had to go home quickly since his father was finishing his work abroad to have a vacation of several months. That was fantastic for the green-haired boy who never saw his father. The relationship between father and son was not as distant as one would think. Every time his father came home from work, the man always tried to spend a long time with his son, something that Izuku loved. However, just as he was about to put away his last notebook, someone snatched it from his hands. Wow, Deku, you're really annoying me with your mumbling. Izuku gulped when he saw the person. The boy was his own age, with wild spiky ash blonde hair, his eyes were red, and he was wearing the same uniform as Izuku. He was Katsuki Bakugo, his childhood friend and his main bully. Kachan, please give me back my notebook, was Izuku's request. The green-haired boy only saw Bakugo smile mockingly and look through the notebook in his hands, before simply bursting it when he closed it. Izuku looked at the book in horror as the blonde threw it to the ground and then stepped on it. Stop that dream, Deku. Without a quirk you're nothing and you'll just be a damn bug, Bakugo said, as his entourage behind him mocked Izuku. Enough with that dream, Deku, you're nothing special. They both mocked, making Izuku clench his fists in irritation. He knew it, deep down in his mind he knew it, but that had always been his dream, to be a hero, to be someone who will help everyone with a smile like All Might, to help people like him. Get out of the way, Deku. The green-haired boy was pushed aside, causing him to fall and look at the ground. Stopping the tears from falling, he picked up his scorched notebook and carefully put it away in his backpack. As he left he clenched his fists and teeth. He was fed up with all this injustice. He was fed up with being thrown aside, being ignored or bothered by injustice. He never chose to be like this. He didn't choose to be born without a quirk, and yet he was born like this. As he walked through the streets of the city, his mind was still meditating and thinking about everything he had to go through after it was known that he was not someone with a quirk. It was so fast that he didn't even notice that everyone put him in some kind of lesser place, as if he was something they should ignore. The looks, the murmurs, all that had begun and more so when Bakugo began to be put in his head that he was special, that built a kind of pride and arrogance in Katsuki. He understood that Kachan's quirk was very impressive, but it wasn't to let him do whatever he wanted, like bothering him or hurting him. It was so unfair. His train of thought stopped when he heard something similar to meat being crushed in an abandoned factory. It was strange. With curiosity he entered the place without even thinking or doing anything. The place was dark. He could see how the walls were in deplorable states and the few machines that remained in the place were covered in cobwebs and dust. This factory had been a wood factory. Here wooden things such as furniture or chairs were created. However, it was abandoned after an incident caused the corporation to abandon the factory. There was not much information about it really, since the corporation decided not to go further into the incident. The sounds were louder every time he got closer, With a little fear he took out his cell phone and turned on the flashlight. When he pointed the light of his flashlight forward, what he saw made him stop and turn very pale. In front of him was a scene that could only be seen in horror movies. Two people were in front of Midoriya, however one of them was lying in his own blood, while the other was devouring the flesh of the dead man. The cannibal had long, disheveled black hair, his ears were pointed, his eyes shone a blood-red color with the pupil slit. His skin was so pale with veins that stood out on his face that was stained with blood and pieces of flesh. His hands had sharp claws and were also covered in blood. It was a terrifying scene that made Izuku want to vomit, however that nauseating reflex was put aside when the devouring man spoke. "Well, it seems like today is my lucky day," the man said, his voice carrying a hint of malice. "And you smell good, your blood is appetizing." The man stood up, spitting out the piece of meat he had in his mouth to open his mouth and reveal his fangs. Izuku didn't even notice when his body moved on its own and he began to run. He was a few steps from the entrance but it was suddenly closed. Izuku stopped dead when he saw the red eyes, staring at him, like some kind of wild beast watching an animal, its next meal. Quickly Izuku began to run in another direction, while he heard the carnivorous man behind him laughing and following him. "You know, I like to play with my prey before devouring them. Your heart pumps more blood for my enjoyment," said the man. Izuku stopped and hid behind a wall. His breathing was agitated. The only thing he thought about was his death, how the strange man talked more and more about how he would kill him and eat him. Shit, think, how can I get out of here without dying? What could his quirk be? Izuku thought as he tried to calm his pounding heart, his mind giving him too much information to analyze, and then he remembered something that made him look ahead. This man avoided the small sources of sunlight that were in the place. He thought it was imperceptible, but for someone who could analyze and deduce quirk, his mind always stopped at the small details, small for anyone who didn't stop to analyze, but Izuku was not like that. His weakness must be sunlight. I have to lure him into a trap. I need to find a place with a really big light source, and that will probably weaken him, was his last thought before a clawed hand pierced through the wall he was on and grabbed him by the collar of his shirt before being pulled and flying to the other side of the wall. "This is enough, I'm already bored." Izuku didn't see it, but he was literally kicked and then felt the pain of his back hitting a wall. The pain was strong and sudden, and then another pain when the man's claws pierced his stomach, making Izuku gasp as blood reverberated from his mouth, but he was quickly silenced by a punch to the face and then he was thrown to the other side and fell to the ground. Izuku placed his hand on his stomach. The blood would not stop coming out of it. His mind began to have the memories of his entire life. "It's unfair, very unfair, my mom, dad, forgive me." The thought was getting weaker and weaker. He could feel every bit of his life going away little by little, his vision turning red, and then he looked at his hand covered in so much blood, the crimson blood that fell from his mouth, and he felt it stain his face. "I never imagined that the color of blood was so fascinating." He. It was a hollow and choppy smile when it was interrupted more when he vomited blood. "Well, it's time for my new feast," said the man and then licked the blood from his hands. It was a very delicious flavor. The boy would be his tastiest feast. With a slow step he approached the boy. His smile grew bigger when he didn't move. Obviously the loss of blood was devastating and the beating even more so. His super strength was another blessing of his abilities. However, his superhuman sense realized something. His heart was not stopping. For a child of his age, the amount of blood leaving his body was enough to kill him. And then he noticed something else. The wound in his stomach began to close. The bones that had broken when he hit him began to sound with disgusting sounds as if the bone began to rearrange itself. And then he noticed something else, something that made him fear. His instinct told him to run, that he was no longer the hunter or the strong animal. Now he was a small prey. The boy slowly stood up. The blood covering him began to move strangely. The blood on the ground also began to rise and pooled around the boy. Quickly Izuku's hand extended and the blood around him reformed into small stakes, and then with extreme speed they impaled the man who was pushed against a wall and hung by the stakes that were lodged in his hands, arms, feet and legs. Izuku approached the man with a slow pace and his nails turned into claws. The man was afraid of the boy. His eyes glowed green with scarlet-red pupils. And then the boy stabbed him in the chest with his own hand. "Ah damn brat, I'll kill you when I get out of here," was the answer, but there was no anger in his tone, it was fear. However, Izuku seemed to ignore him when he pierced the man's chest further, and without saying anything, as if he were some kind of balloon, the man exploded. Everything stained the walls of the place. Flesh, blood, bones and viscera covered the walls and ceiling, along with Izuku, who watched his act. However, something changed. His mind went blank and then he fell to the ground, unconscious. And this was the day when everything I believed in changed forever. I didn't know what kind of problems would happen in the future. I was still a child who had just solved his quirk problem, and instead of awakening a quirk, I abandoned something much older, something that was written in very old tales and myths. He felt light, as if gravity had no power over him. When he opened his eyes, he saw the deep emptiness of a sea that was not of water, but rather of some kind of red liquid. Blood, was the thought that came out of Izuku. He didn't feel like breathing in this sea of blood. It was so quiet and reassuring that the restlessness disappeared and never appeared again. He felt calm, relaxed, there was no fear. However, the deep, dark sea began to lighten little by little, until it turned white and left him blind for several minutes. His vision began to clear and he saw the white ceiling of a room. Then his gaze settled on his surroundings. The whole room was white and smelled like medicine. A hospital room. He whispered to himself. Before looking at himself, he was wearing a black shirt, with black sweatpants. Obviously he was covered by a hospital blanket. Then his ears rang so loudly that he got a headache. Then his nose was covered. He identified many smells, even the ones he couldn't identify, and it bothered and hurt him. Suddenly his ears and nose were abruptly covered. When he looked, he recognized the man in front of him. The man had the appearance of someone over 30 years old, with gray hair with some black strands in it. It had a disheveled shape like Izuku's. His eyes were a deep blue with slanted blood-red pupils. His skin had a clearly pale tone, not as sickly as that of a sick person. He was wearing a black work suit, with a red tie and a white dress shirt. The man was his own father, Hisashi Midoriya. "I think you hear me now. Nod if you can hear me." Izuku did as instructed while his father sighed in relief. "That's good. You know something. I was surprised you were in that place. I never imagined my son would get into trouble," Hisashi said. Izuku was still getting used to the pain in his ears and nose. "Dad? What happened?" Izuku finally spoke. The older Midoriya waited before speaking. It seemed like his son was still not okay, so he waited until Izuku could hear perfectly. His ears slowly stopped hurting, until he no longer felt discomfort or pain. The gray, black-haired man noticed this and began to speak. "We found you in that abandoned wood factory covered in blood and passed out. You really gave me and your mother a horrible scare when you didn't come back," Hisashi said while Izuku remembered what happened. "Dad. Me." Hisashi put his hand on his son's head, caressing those green curls. "Calm down. I'm not blaming you. What happened was that bastard's fault," Hisashi said. Clearly he knew what had happened, not everything, but he could reconstruct and have some hypotheses. "I want you to tell me what happened," Hisashi reassured his son while speaking to him calmly. Then there were minutes in which Izuku told him everything that happened before falling unconscious. The father only nodded and sighed in relief. His son was fine and he didn't have to carry out a massacre. For the moment. "I knew that sooner or later this would happen, although I never imagined it would be so soon. Come with me," Hisashi said before getting up from the chair he was in and looking at his son. After another few minutes, both Midoriya, father and son, walked down a long hallway. The son still didn't know what was happening and looked at his father. His gaze was calm as always, but he identified something in him. He wasn't sure. His father was hiding something that he himself couldn't know. He was about to ask, but his father interrupted him. "You must have a lot of questions, and I'm going to answer them, but first I have to explain something to you." What Hisashi said caused a lot of curiosity and questions. "That man exploded and controlled blood, is that a quirk?" the boy asked, making Hisashi shake his head. "No. It's not, it's older than a quirk. In the pre-quirk era, even centuries ago, the existence of mythological beings were only legends, stories that people believed for a long time or simply intuited that they were lies. But they're all true." Izuku looked at his father in surprise. "So, demons, vampires, werewolves, even the Kraken exist?" the green-haired boy asked. His father nodded. "Yes, all the mythological beings you can imagine are real. It's one of the possible causes why quirks exist, or so the agency thinks," Hisashi said. Agency? Yes, I work in an agency that is in charge of monitoring and resolving abnormal activities, from every being you can imagine. Hisashi said before opening a door and showing what was behind it. It looked like a large chamber. There were people with computers and talking on the phone. Some of these were walking back and forth with documents and sheets. Even small people flying around the place. World Organization of Mythological Activity, or OMAM. Hisashi smiled when he saw his son look around in surprise and fascination. Some people who don't know about the existence of other beings believe that it is a heroic agency, but secretly we are in charge of solving problems that a vampire like the one you saw causes. Thank God, many of these problems, we can easily hide them as the consequences of a villain's attack. That's impressive, but you still don't explain what happened to me. Izuku said. Hisashi sighed and motioned for Izuku to go into another place, away from everyone to talk. Well, both you and I come from a vampire bloodline. However, for some reason you weren't born a vampire. I was even surprised when you didn't acquire any superhuman characteristics, only your particular eyes that you inherited from me, Hisashi said. Izuku looked down at himself, noticing his long, pointed nails. But yesterday's accident made me wonder why your vampire blood awakened. But that can't be. I've seen you walk during the day in the sun, but the vampire I faced had a weakness against the sun. Izuku said, making Hisashi nod. The explanation for that is simple. Dracula is an ancestor of ours. He was the first vampire of the entire bloodline. From him they separated into 12 noble families descended from him. We are not weak to the sun thanks to the fact that we are direct descendants of him, but even the sunlight weakens us a little. But vampires like the ones you know are weak to the sun thanks to the fact that they are converted vampires. Mei explained, making Izuku open his eyes in surprise. However, if a noble vampire gives enough blood to a normal person and turns them into a vampire, they will have an immunity to the sun like us too. The vampire you fought was converted thanks to somehow meeting the cannibals. Cannibals? Hisashi nodded. Yes, they are vampires who ate other vampires, causing them to have a strange curse that makes them unable to survive under sunlight, was Hisashi's answer. Hisashi's family for many centuries was in charge of fighting against cannibals, but as time passed, they became too many, causing the great family descended from the Dracula to disperse and few remained. Hisashi had more than 100 years of life to fight against those vampires. Curse. Hisashi nodded again. Magic is real sun, however very few beings can possess it. For example, demons, fairies, elves, and other races are capable of using them, including vampires, but only a minority can use it. Hisashi said, making Izuku look at his hands and think and reflect. Does Mom know about this? Was Izuku's question. Hisashi nodded at the question. Yes, your mother had been an agent of this organization. We met and fell in love. We thought that since you were born without any power or quirk, you shouldn't know this until you came of age, and we had even planned to turn you into a vampire. However, a child cannot withstand the transformation and would die within minutes. Izuku nodded. If you want, I can teach you to control your impulses and train you. After all, we need self-control before you kill someone. Bloodlust can be a bit annoying if not controlled in time. Hisashi said. Izuku looked at his father. Can I become a hero, Dad? With these powers, can I be a hero? The question was quick. Hisashi looked at his son. Hisashi himself never paid attention to being a hero. All that popularity thing was not his thing. But something that both father and son had in common was the desire to protect other people. Of course you can, was the father's response before being interrupted by someone who opened the door. Hisashi, the girl has arrived, was the response of a man. He had green skin, with fangs that stuck out. He was very large with muscles and a business suit like Hisashi's. Okay, work, I'm on my way, Hisashi said before smiling at Izuku. Do you want to see how I work? Izuku only nodded before accompanying his father. Some time later. 2 days later. Those 2 days were really amazing for Izuku. When he came back home, his mother had hugged him and cried, telling him how worried she had been and how scared she had when he hadn't come back. Then they gave him the news that he had awakened his vampire blood, making the green-haired woman smile at her son and start making his favorite food, katsudon. And the next day his training started as his father expected. The abilities that a vampire normally had, his son had. Super strength, super speed, sharper senses, and of course the super regeneration that he had. The first thing he learned was the exclusive abilities that each pureblood vampire could have, which were categorized into 3 types of abilities. The categories were physiological, mental and blood. The physiological ones consisted of the mutation that a vampire could give to his body, being able to manipulate the biomass of his body to mutate it and create something new. For example, making his arms able to be reinforced with the biomass itself or creating blades based on his bones. Then there were the mental ones. These consisted of mental control abilities, reading minds or feeling the emotions of a person or animal, or any living being. And finally the sanguine ones. These consisted of total control of the blood. No matter how, they could change the state of the blood, from liquid to solid and from solid to gaseous. Even control the blood of other people. This category was the least common and almost impossible to have. And possibly Izuku had the third category. However, he had not been able to control the blood again. He had been trying, but it was never possible. Remembering all that, Izuku only breathed and drank from his bottle. A normal person would think it was water. However, it was pig's blood. Thanks to his vampire blood awakening, the desire for blood was always on his mind, and to calm him down, the blood of any animal worked to calm those desires and hunger for human blood. Although not resorting to human blood would block his potential as a vampire and would have a limit on his capabilities. With a sigh he walked until he reached his school. Today was going to be a new beginning, or so he wanted to think. With all that, having high expectations isn't so bad, obviously, when you think that your classmates can change how they treat you. Izuku thought. He had high expectations that his classmates and some teachers would change their attitude towards him, but it wasn't like that. Now people were afraid of him, knowing that he had to consume blood to become strong and that he could handle the blood of other people. That caused fear in all his classmates and teachers, labeling it a villain quirk or a terror quirk. He had really expected a change in behavior, however it never happened, and that bothered the green-haired man himself. Hell, they can't be happy with anything. If you don't have a quirk, then they will look down on you and leave you aside. If you have some kind of mutation, then they will fear you and ignore you, and that goes for villain quirks too. He said while kicking a can. However, the can shot with great force towards a wall, and this can seemed to hit with enough force to create some kind of crack in the wall. I really need to control my strength, the green-haired Midoriya said to himself, as he continued on his way. Training area. So what are these things? Izuku asked his father, while he configured some bracelets on his hands and others on his feet. These are weights, devices capable of changing their weight with a setting, designed to restrain any idiot who wants to make a mess, but some in the agency use them as training weights, said the eldest of the Midoriyas, while he correctly configured the weights and gave his son a small control with only 3 buttons. The top button is for increasing, while the bottom one is for lowering the weight. The screen will indicate the weight number, and the middle button is to deactivate these weights, explained the man while his son began to test the device. Izuku never heard of a technology that could increase the gravity of handcuffs, but this would be good for his training. You probably already understood what you're going to use them for, but if you haven't deduced it, I'll explain it to you. By using it constantly, you will increase your already superhuman strength, but it will also help that when you don't have the weights, you can reach great speeds while running. The more you get used to the indicated weight, we will increase the weight, and with your healing ability, there will be no problems with muscle tears, the man explained while his son put the best possible weight on him. And now, we will use this ball launcher so you can dodge or hit the balls fired. Hisashi began to press several buttons on the machine that had balls of different sizes. Your training will not be so easy, Izuku. You have to surpass all those children and improve as much as you can. The youngest Midoriya nodded and prepared himself. Before entering the UA, he needed to reach the others and surpass them. Later that night, Izuku was in his bedroom in his apartment, watching All Might's debut video. It had been a habit since he knew he didn't have a quirk. With a sigh, he stopped the video and looked at his hero registration notebook. He currently had 7 notebooks with records of the quirks he had seen throughout his life, their possible abilities and weaknesses, also some that had the potential to evolve. It was something not so common, but there were records that a mutation quirk could surpass its own limits and become stronger. He began to look through his notebooks a lot and stopped at one. Then he searched for the hero's name on the internet and began to watch videos of his fights against villains. It had been a conversation with his father. He could find someone to train him in different fighting styles so he wouldn't have the need to hit what he sees. With a sigh, he analyzed the hero's movements and tried to replicate them in his room. Then he went to another hero. This one was in the top 10. And he did the same. One after another he analyzed and replicated, only the heroes who used hand-to-hand combat or capture styles. Izuku, it's dinner time. His mother's scream caused her son's concentration to deviate and fall to the ground. This of course caused several things to fall on top of him, including an All Might figure. The doll stabbed the green-haired boy in the stomach with the part of the doll's raised locks, something that made Izuku grunt in pain, feeling the toy stabbing him. After a few minutes, Izuku went down from his room to the living room, finding his father setting the table while his mother Izuku Midoriya brought some of the dishes with her quirk. Izuku was a beautiful woman, with dark green hair tied in a ponytail, with green eyes, with pale skin and a slender body. She wore a pink button-down shirt and a dark blue skirt that reached her knees. "Izuku, what happened to you?" Hisashi asked, while Izuku looked at her son and found that her son's shirt was stained with blood. "Well, I stabbed myself with one of All Might's dolls." Izuku scratched his cheek in shame. His father laughed at him while Izuku silenced him with a blow from a frying pan, making the man complain about the blow. "Izuku-chan, my love, why the blow? Don't make fun of Izu. You know what I can do to you with a chopstick." Izuku said to the man of the house. Izuku couldn't give an answer as to how his father feared his mother. Even Aunt Mitsuki, who was a very explosive woman, was a little afraid of his mother. Okay. Hisashi calmed his clearly angry wife before looking at his son. "Sit down, dinner is served." Izuku nodded and sat down. Something that hybrids like him is that they could eat normal food. His father too, but they didn't feed him like a normal person. Blood was necessary for a pureblood vampire, and normal food was not an ideal food for one. Izuku was a special case for being born a hybrid. Even after taking his first glass of human blood, he won't have a problem feeding on food. It's just that the need to drink blood is much greater. Hisashi looked at his son with a smile, but then frowned. His son in the future will face those vampires crazy for the blood of other vampires, and his son will have to kill them. It was the only way to stop them. He would have to give him a more aggressive training if he wanted his son to be ready for what was coming. The cannibal vampires were lovers of the blood of the vampires that came from the noble blood of Dracula, and many of them would not leave his son aside. Hisashi clenched his fists when he had that thought. If any of those sons of bitches came near his son, then the son of a bitch would die in the slowest and most painful way that he himself could give him. Nobody touched his son and got away with it, even those little bastards from his school. Ready. Second complete chapter and ready. The cannibals are vampires that devour other vampires, and they have a curse that consists of them dying if they are exposed to the sun or any type of ultraviolet light, but they are stronger than a normal vampire. Although the strongest vampires of this type can resist a little heat before being completely incinerated. Magic does exist. Obviously beings that can use magic do not use their magic at first sight because they would create responses. You can imagine magic as it is. But in the future I will explain more in depth about magical beings. Those who are descendants of Dracula, their exposure to the sun is not fatal, only when exposed to the sun. Their superhuman abilities are not as powerful as at night or in the dark. Izuku does not yet have his full potential unlocked due to his refusal to drink human blood. The method to calm that desire is to drink animal blood, but he can also eat normal food like a normal person. So Midoriya's son did get powers. A man's voice echoed in a dark room, only illuminated by candles with purple fire, giving the place a macabre contrast. Yes, it seems that one of them irritated him too much for him to awaken his blood. A person who was leaning over informed the man who smiled. "Well, that's a good thing. The council won't be complaining for a long time. Hisashi is lucky to have me as an ally," the man said as he thought of the vampire that was Hisashi. Among vampires and other races, Hisashi's legend was well known. The man who completely destroyed the oldest and most outdated laws of the ancient vampires, before the belief of pure blood was a law. If any pure blood vampire were to have a child with another person who was not a vampire, then the child would die along with the mother who gave birth or the father, depending on who was not a vampire. However, Hisashi changed everything. The ancient laws were trampled by the man, creating a kind of civil war between those who loved the purity of blood and those who were not so fond of it. The war ended after Hisashi destroyed the old council and of course recreating a completely new law that any vampire could marry and have offspring with whoever they wanted. And then Hisashi's son was born, without any vampiric powers, only inheriting his father's eyes and nothing else, and that also highlights the fact that the child had not been born with the peculiarities that the human boasted so much. This was chaos because of the current council, wanting the death of the child as it had no benefit to the race. However, Hisashi has always threatened every person who approached his son. The council would never say it out loud, but the man was powerful enough to slaughter them, and then there was his wife, an expert hunter. The woman was well known for her hunting skills and her ability to annihilate carnivorous vampires. She had been called Reaper. A very good title if he would say so himself. The woman was strong and lethal. Many had wanted to marry the woman, however she decided to have a family with Hisashi. "Do you know the ability I have?" the man asked with genuine curiosity. He had heard that a similarly hybrid girl had awakened an ability to create illusions through her mouth that spread like a kind of vapor. "I have no information at the moment, but from what I heard from one of the agents of that organization, the boy seems to be able to control blood," was the response of the second person who was leaning over. The man's blood-red eyes shone. Very interesting. Keep watching him, report back to me, and if any accident happens, don't let him die," the man ordered. The second leaning man nodded before disappearing in a dark smoke of sorts. Blood control. Very interesting, Hisashi. The man thought to himself. Show me what you can do in the future, Izuku Midoriya. 5 years later. Izuku Midoriya slowly opened his eyes, staring at the ceiling of his room like every day he woke up. The young hybrid sat up in his bed, looking around, looking at the All Might posters and their limited edition figures. With a grunt, the green-haired boy quickly reached for a bottle and drank from it. It had been 5 years since he awakened his abilities, and the changes were noticeable. His hair had the same shape, his skin had a much paler tone, his ears were pointed, a clear mutation of his blood, his eyes had an abnormal green glow. His body was the most striking change. He was no longer the short and skinny boy he was 5 years ago. The training he had had and had currently made his physical constitution change. To be a 15-year-old boy, his body developed muscles, not as bulging as those of Endeavor or All Might, but enough for faster and more agile mobility. The strangest thing was that on his forearm there was a kind of small tattoo that had the shape of a rhombus with 4 triangles on each side. It had appeared a year ago and no one knew why it appeared on Izuku. It was lucky that his mother had not reacted so badly to the tattoo. With a sigh he looked out the window of his room, noticing that it was still dawn. Good luck, it's time to run, Izuku thought as he began to get ready. After a few minutes he left a house. A year ago the Midoriya family had moved to their own compound, and Izuku had started studying at home, something that was very common. Inko had tried to get her son to study at a school close to home, however Izuku refused. It didn't bother him that he was left alone. After all, he had gotten used to it after he turned 4. However, he didn't want to have any problems or false accusations. As happened in his previous academy, it was one of the reasons why he had changed houses, but the strangest thing was that Bakugo or Kachan had calmed down after it was learned that he had a quirk. He was still a screaming and explosive child, but at least he didn't mess with him anymore. It could be possible because Izuku had the strength to break his ribs with a punch, or because his explosions no longer had an effect due to his healing factor that had increased his speed in these years. And he had also met a girl who had been saved by her father from her abusive parents who were afraid of the quirk and attitude their daughter had, after manifesting her quirk. Flashback. 1 year earlier. Izuku was dodging and hitting the balls shot by the ball machine that his father had bought or obtained. However, the machine turned off as soon as Hisashi entered the room. Behind him was a girl about Izuku's age. "Izuku, come, I want to introduce you to someone," Hisashi called, making Izuku look at him and approach him. He noticed that the girl was hiding behind her father, something strange. "Izuku, this is Himiko Toga, Himiko-chan, this is my son Izuku." The eldest Midoriya introduced the 2 children. Izuku's keen sense of smell noticed something about Himiko. "You're a vampire." Himiko looked at Izuku and nodded. Himiko's parents weren't vampires, but it seems that some ancestor of theirs was, causing her to be born with a somewhat interesting quirk. Hisashi explained. Himiko simply looked at the eldest Midoriya and Izuku looked at his father curiously. A kind of question mark appeared to Izuku as he didn't understand. Himiko's quirk is based on taking a person's blood, and becoming the person she stole their blood from. However, her quirk also makes her crave blood. Hisashi explained, it had been a delicate matter. The girl's parents had tried in many ways possible to hide the desire for their daughter's blood. This caused the girl to retain those blood impulses, something bad because the girl could explode and slaughter a person. The parents' fear towards their own daughter caused the parents to act like bastards towards their daughter, calling her a monster or even hitting her as a kind of punishment. The OMAM had found this case and did what they had to do, protect the girl from abusive and idiotic parents. The girl had been in confinement with Hisashi, who did his best to calm her bloodlust. It was a success when he learned that the girl could make those impulses disappear by drinking the blood of people or animals. Izuku, can you show Himiko-chan around the house? Izuku nodded at his father's request, before walking over to the little girl and taking her hand before leaving the room. With a sigh, Hisashi looked at both children. He was somewhat angry at the parents' attitude towards their daughter. He had been tempted to drink their blood until they were empty and dead. However, he had enough self-control to stop that line of thought. End of flashback. Himiko, unlike Izuku, had entered a school close to her house. He had heard from her that she had made a delicious friend. Izuku had gotten used to Toga's weird way of calling anyone she liked delicious. It could even be misinterpreted if someone else who didn't know Toga heard her, and then there's also her habit of biting him on the neck and drinking his blood. It was strange, but it didn't bother him. If a vampire didn't want someone to become one, then his blood wouldn't turn a person into a vampire, so he didn't have to worry so much about Himiko becoming a vampire by drinking his blood. And then the situation with her parents. After Hisashi saved her, the parents had disappeared, forgetting their daughter and leaving her to her fate, something that upset him and Inko as well. Inko had grown fond of the girl as soon as she arrived, and even trained her in how to use a variety of knives and martial arts to stop a person. Alright. Time to find out what maximum speed I'm capable of reaching. Izuku thought to himself as he arrived at a forest near his house. The forest was large, very large, and around it there were speed devices that timed and measured the speed of any object. His father had told him that a vampire could run as fast as a race car, and there were even vampires that exceeded the speed of sound or reached Mach 4. Positioning himself in the starting area, Izuku deactivated the weights he had on his body. Feeling even lighter than before, he positioned himself and waited for the clock counter to reach 0. Little by little, Izuku began to breathe calmly, listening to the movement of the leaves of the trees, his heartbeat, how his blood ran through his body and his muscles contracted. His sense of smell noticed the different smells of what surrounded him, even the smell of the blood of animals that roamed around. His eyes seemed to sharpen more when his pupil became narrower and glowed in a red color. With a last breath, the counter reached 0 and then exploded. The ground where he had been before broke, letting the earth beneath him explode, and then the floosh of something running at high speed through the place. Izuku reached the finish line in less than 10 minutes, the device clinking as it identified the speed. Izuku approached the device and looked at what marked the speed and time in which he arrived. 53 kilometers per hour was what it measured, making the green-haired man sigh. He hadn't exceeded the speed. It seemed that was his maximum speed, something bad. However, this did not stop him. According to his father, vampires could increase their strength to a higher level. However, Izuku did not have something like that since he did not yet feed on human blood. Obviously, this situation prevented him from rising from his current potential. Himiko must be back home. Izuku thought before looking at the device again and leaving it on the ground, and like before, he began to run to his house. In the mornings he trained his speed. After that he waited for his private classes to start, and after these, he began with the combat training between him and Himiko, and finally his attempt to control the blood that he could not do yet. Midoriya house. Izuku arrived in time to see Himiko approach him with a snake hug. The blonde-haired girl bit him on the neck, drawing blood, something that didn't bother Izuku but was uncomfortable when Inko watched this action. The mother didn't blink or move, she just watched them attentively. With a sigh, he waited for the blonde-haired girl to let go of him, and he didn't wait long. "Izu, I'm back." She laughed, causing Izuku to greet her with a smile. "It's time for breakfast," Inko exclaimed, causing Izuku to nod, as did Himiko. "There are 10 months left until we enter UA. How do you feel?" Toga's sudden question caused Izuku to think. He had been waiting for this for almost his entire life, to go to the high school that All Might had studied at and become a hero like All Might. However, now he had more goals that would follow him in the future. After all, he was a hybrid of vampire and human, And he also always had a goal in him for other races that were not as in favor of his father as one would think. I think I'll be fine, even if I haven't activated my ability yet, I still have super strength. Izuku explained. He could never control his ability, it was strange without a doubt. Even Hisashi found this strange. Hybrids never had problems controlling their abilities, but Izuku was a special case. According to Hisashi, he had several hypotheses as to why he couldn't use them. However, they were several hypotheses that contradicted what he believed about vampires. Well, it doesn't matter. Izuku said, with what he had he could pass the UA entrance exam. It was very lucky that he had a healing, regeneration factor. OMAM office. Hisashi was in a meeting at the agency. The reason, the increase in the actions of carnivorous vampires around the world. The meeting was with each of the leaders of the royal vampire family, and with the strongest group of vampires so far, called the 10 Fangs. The 10 Fangs were a group of vampires well known for having the strongest members of vampires that existed in the world. They were in charge of matters related to carnivores and were very rarely called for matters in the noble vampire families. So, you're saying that the activity of those idiots has been increasing in this last century? A man spoke. The image on the screen did not show his face, only that he was wearing very high-quality formal clothing. Yes. I have been analyzing their movements, however I have not been able to catch any of them alive. They die as quickly as I catch them. Said another, while a page was shown on the screen and Hisashi read it. They've been attacking laboratories, all over the world, especially the laboratories that analyze the peculiarities of humans. Said a member of the 10 Fangs. Hisashi looked at the file and with the superhuman speed that characterized him he read it completely. Do you know who he works for? Hisashi's question made everyone fall silent. Why do you think they work for someone? Was the question of another noble. Hisashi looked at the man's camera and like the previous one, he didn't see his face. In all these years, even when the quirks appeared, those imbeciles never seemed to care about the quirks of humans. However, now they seem more than interested enough to attack several laboratories. So this gives me the idea that they are working for someone. Hisashi said while everyone in the meeting thought about this and seemed to accept it. Since the appearance of quirks, no vampire was interested in peculiarities. It was all due to the belief that humans somehow obtained some kind of divine improvement or something. One could not be so concise with the appearance of the quirk. The appearance of these was a surprise to the other races, but nothing more than that happened. Do you know of someone they would work with? One asked. Hisashi thought about it. His analytical mind thought about it and remembered all the files he had read in this century. However, none spoke of someone who wanted to work with those idiots, not even any terrorist or villain organization that he knew of. No, it seems that their union was just in these years. However, the increase in their activities is still unknown and the reason why. But I will try to find out. Hisashi said. It was strange, very strange. We have to do our best to get some information, because it seems that the person they work with is very good with robbery plans. Said one of them, while there was a video of the robbery of one of the most secure laboratories in Russia. It seems that it was planned down to the smallest detail. The man knows his abilities and devised a plan to depend on all of them. Hisashi watched the recording very carefully and what he saw made him frown. The one who devised the plan was very meticulous, and if that were not enough, he seemed to devise several plans at the same time as the mission continued. It seems that Izuku has some rival, Hisashi thought, while thinking more about the robbery. Well, I will do my best to get more information. Please, if you have something, let me know. Hisashi said, and everyone nodded in affirmation before the meeting ended. Hisashi sighed. He had never had a meeting with the other vampire nobles. The last one was more than 300 years ago, and that was simply to talk about completely unnecessary and unimportant things. Well, it's time to go. Hisashi stood up from his seat and left his office, but not before activating the security of his office. With Izuku later that day. Izuku had left his house. He had wanted to visit the city of Musutafu several days ago, and today was a day off from training and studying. He walked through the streets of the city that was once his home. He had many memories of these places, but most of them were unhappy. The green-haired boy sighed. He had wanted to go to the Aldera Academy, only out of morbid curiosity. He didn't like it, but he hadn't seen it for years. He didn't want to talk to his former classmates. He just wanted to see the place and nothing more than that. He didn't want to have any trouble with them now. Passing under a bridge, His sense of hearing picked up the sound of something slimy moving behind him. When he realized it, he had disappeared from the sneak attack of a villain made of mud. The sludge villain had escaped from All Might a few moments ago. He had to escape the place and take someone as a hostage, and he saw that Izuku was a good body for his purpose. When he attacked him to get inside, the boy had disappeared from his sight. He was fast, something that impressed him. He had approached the boy very stealthily, however the boy had disappeared from his attack and vision. Izuku appeared behind the sludge villain. He never expected a villain to attack a student, however he didn't think about anything else when the villain attacked him again. Izuku dodged the attacks that came and went. The villain was made of mud and could attack him from many sides, however his movements were slow for Izuku. Izuku's enhanced hearing made him able to dodge surprise attacks. However, after several seconds the mud villain completely reformed, covering the place. "You will be a good body that I am going to use," the villain exclaimed with anger in his eyes. But this anger soon turned to fear when he looked at a person behind Izuku. "There is no need to fear anymore. Do you know why? Because I am here." Izuku looked back and saw his favorite hero. All Might was smiling with a pose that imposed respect and showed his great height, with his blue eyes shining. "Damn it. It is." The villain didn't finish speaking when with a punch he was turned into mud stains that covered the place. Izuku was surprised. He had seen in many videos the strength and speed that All Might possessed, however seeing him in the front row was a totally different thing. "Ha ha ha. Those were good moves, boy. You were very agile." The man laughed. When he arrived he had seen the boy dodge the villain's attacks with great practiced ease. Suddenly All Might took out 2 empty water bottles and with great speed he picked up the mud villain, putting him in both bottles. All Might. See, could you?" Izuku was interrupted when his shirt was signed by the hero himself, who laughed at the expression on the green-haired man's face. "Well, it's time to go," All Might said, but not before looking at Izuku. At first glance the boy seemed to have a well-worked body, and with those movements he wouldn't be surprised to see him in the UA as a future hero, and without saying anything he jumped out of the place. Izuku still looked at All Might in shock. I knew All Might. Fucking great. Izuku shouted the last phrase in his mind. Even in these 5 years his hero fanboy status had never gone away. Then he looked at his shirt. There was All Might's signature. Damn. He had to tell Himiko that he met All Might and never wash this shirt. He would put it somewhere in his room and take care of it like a son. With All Might. The #1 hero stopped at one of the city's tall skyscrapers. Spitting out some blood, his body began to emit steam before exploding into steam, appearing in a new form. His heroic and muscular appearance had been changed to a skinny and emaciated appearance. Coughing up more blood, the man looked at the city carefully. Damn. I was too accommodating. If the boy didn't have great ability, the boy would be in big trouble. All Might are also known by very few people, Toshinori Yagi, he thought. His time with One for All was slowly coming to an end. He could only maintain his muscular form for 5 hours a day now, and today he had surpassed his limits. With a deep sigh and after wiping the blood that fell from the corner of his mouth, the man passed his hand over where he had the bottles. However, he felt nothing. Looking down, he noticed that the 2 bottles were gone. His face transformed into one of fear when he didn't see them, and as quickly as his body left him, he ran down the stairs of the large skyscraper. Shit. I'm an idiot. Toshinori scolded himself. On the other side of town, a group of 3 students were in an alley. Hey Bakugo. If I remember correctly, you had a friend, right? What happened to him? One of the boys spoke to Katsuki Bakugo. The boy still had that angry expression. The passing of the years had not changed him at all. What do I know? That bastard left without saying anything. Bakugo exclaimed. From one day to the next, Izuku, or Deku, as he called him, had disappeared, and a week later he had learned that the green-haired man had moved out of his apartment. Even if he didn't have a good relationship with him, his parents did. Besides, what do you care? I don't care, I was just curious. After all, he was quirkless until his quirk appeared and caused chaos in the academy. The boy said. Bakugo just sulked. It was a very unpleasant matter for Katsuki, literally the teachers and several classmates. He had made Izuku leave the academy because his quirk was too dangerous. Katsuki didn't find it funny. It wasn't like he liked Izuku, but even he knew that the ruse was unfair and pathetic. Yeah. Do you think Midoriya still wants to be a hero? Was the other boy's question. Bakugo looked at him and thought about that. After he had left, they never spoke again, or even when Inko visited Mitsuki for work reasons, she never saw Deku. However, even he knew that Izuku was as stubborn as him in his dream of being a hero. If no one brought him down from that dream when he was quirkless, then currently no one would make him change his mind. With a growl, Bakugo pulled out a drink from a drink machine and began to drink it. "Hey you fucking idiot, don't smoke around me!" The blonde with explosions exclaimed angrily, throwing the soda can at his partner who was smoking, causing him to yell at him. However, the dispute stopped when the two partners began to have a scared expression. Katsuki looked at this with curiosity before looking where his partners were looking. The last thing he saw was some kind of green mass or mud covering him with a maniacal smile. With Izuku. The green-haired man, after visiting some areas of the city, was walking back to his house. However, when he crossed another street, a loud explosion was present. Izuku looked towards where the explosion occurred and saw a large column of smoke. Out of curiosity, he went to the place. When he arrived, he noticed several heroes gathered looking with some frustration a few meters in front of them. Izuku opened his eyes to recognize the villain. The same guy who had attacked him an hour ago was causing a lot of destruction, although the strange thing was that explosions appeared and were created from the mud. Why don't the heroes do anything? I heard the villain has a student as a Reen. Poor boy, the heroes have to do something fast or else he'll die. The discussions were heard by Izuku. Sharpening his vision, he took a closer look at the villain, and when he made a full turn, Izuku's eyes recognized the student. Kachan. Izuku whispered, the surprise palpable in his eyes when he saw his former childhood friend being the Reen of a villain, the same villain he had seen an hour ago, being caught by All Might. Damn it. We can't do anything, we need another hero. One of the heroes spoke, clearly annoyed by the situation and irritated by it as well. The boy has to endure. Another said, this particular hero seemed to be made entirely of wood. Izuku knew him as Kamui Woods, a hero who had only made his appearance a few months ago. Next to him was a rookie heroine, Mount Lady. Clearly he won't be able to hold on much longer. Another said, Izuku knew him as Death Arms. Izuku's body trembled, not out of fear, but rather out of nervousness. Suddenly he felt something in his body when he saw Bakugo's face and expression, fear and despair. He didn't notice when his body moved on its own, he only heard the voices of several heroes screaming. When he realized it was too late to run somewhere else, he was running towards the sludge villain. The villain reacted to the boy and with a cry of anger, attacked him with a sludge tentacle. However, this tentacle was dodged by the green-haired man. Suddenly the green-haired man deviated his trajectory and grabbed a piece of wood that was on fire. With high speed he approached the villain very quickly, and with one movement he stabbed the flaming piece of wood into the sludge villain, causing him to scream in pain. Izuku reacted quickly and grabbed Bakugo's shirt and then pulled him back with all his strength. Bakugo was in shock for a few moments. However, when he felt that his arms were no longer held by the mud, he turned his head towards the villain. Die, you disgusting bastard. The blonde's palms lit up yellow with small explosions. Then a large explosion rushed towards the villain, who screamed in pain again as he was strongly attacked by the large explosion. Both young men were thrown away from the villain, falling to the ground. However, they did not expect the villain to recover from the explosion very quickly and launch himself towards both boys, ready to kill them. When that happened, Izuku didn't close his eyes and saw how in a blur of explosive speed, All Might had appeared, blocking the villain's attack. Damn. I'm pathetic. A child is doing a hero's job and I'm left as a spectator. I'm very pathetic. All Might exclaimed with a smile. Thank you, young man, for making me see reason. I've become very inconsiderate and arrogant. But now it's time to say goodbye, villain. All Might began to close his hand into a fist, and then everyone saw how with a punch All Might, the #1 hero, had created rain with the force of his punch, putting out the fire in the entire place. Narrates Izuku. After All Might failed to save them, the heroes began to scold me for my recklessness. Out of curiosity, I turned to where Kachan was. However, I had heard that they were praising him for his ability to stay afloat and how impressive his quirk was. It didn't bother me like it really should have. Izuku was walking home. A few moments ago the heroes had left him alone to leave. However, he heard someone approaching, and when he turned around he saw Bakugo stop and seemed to be panting. Deku. Bastard, I didn't ask you for help. Even if it's been a while since we've seen each other. You're still a Deku, fuck off and don't think you're better than me. Bakugo gasped before growling and leaving, walking away from Izuku, who simply snorted at this. It's not too hard to say thanks, Kachin, but still you're welcome. Izuku whispered to himself before continuing on his way. However, All Might appeared in front of the green-haired boy. I stopped in front of you like a normal person. All Might exclaimed in a not at all normal pose. However, before he could utter another word, he exploded in a cloud of smoke, causing Izuku to cover his face. When it dissipated, he found another person who was not All Might. However, his sense of smell had identified the same smell as All Might. Damn, I have really overdone it. The man said to himself as he looked at the young man. What happened to you? Was Izuku's question. Seeing him, he could somehow hear All Might's heartbeat, but also the lack of some organs and that his blood was flowing in an abnormal way in his body. I'm sorry if you see me so young, this is my true appearance, said the man. Izuku simply nodded. This weak and fragile appearance is the consequence of a really horrible wound that caused me a fight a few years ago. All Might lifted his white shirt, showing how his stomach had a really critical bruise on his stomach. The villain who caused this wound destroyed part of my stomach and one of my lungs. Since that day I can't maintain my muscular form for so long, or else the severity of the wound will increase. Izuku shuddered at this. Thanks to his healing regeneration factor, he wasn't afraid of having such a critical wound. Why are you telling me this? Izuku's question brought the blonde man out of his thoughts. Why? For a while now I've become inconsiderate and less observant. Today's incident was a clear example. However, All Might looked at Izuku, his blue eyes reflecting a glow that seemed magical. You were better than me. Even if you didn't have the proper training, you saved that young man from that villain. While I watched helplessly, you ran towards him to save him, and that awakened something in me that hadn't been there for a long time. You, like some heroes who preceded me, ran without realizing it. All Might's eyes sparkled, as the breeze in the air fluttered his hair and clothes. And that's why, I know you're the one. The man put his hand out as if holding some kind of sphere, and his palm glowed in multiple colors. You're the one to inherit my quirk, one for all. The fragmentation of the wishes and will of many people who came before me. Izuku looked at this in surprise, his eyes seeing the multicolored glow that All Might had created. He even noticed that this glow was accompanied by small sparks of electricity of multiple colors. One for all? Inherit? Quirk? Izuku's mind was spinning around that. Many people had been giving hypotheses about All Might's quirk, however he had never given its name. This quirk was given to me and inherited like a torch. The power of 8 bearers, their will, their desires, are what One for All represents. And I want you to be my successor, the 9th bearer of this quirk. All Might opened his arms dramatically, while the evening sky made this be represented as something very important and profound. Narrates Izuku. That was the day. The day when my favorite hero trusted me to be his successor and new bearer of One for All, not knowing that this would give me more problems than I already had. To be continued. I hope you enjoyed this story. Also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.